Experience shows us that oftentimes there are three sides to every story. Your side, my side, and somewhere in the middle, the truth. And tonight, just maybe, our guest will deliver just that. If one were to look at the parliamentary makeup of our honourable chambers, it would be easy to assume that the Bahamas is made up of just two parties. But there are many more. Welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Over the past few decades, the Bahamas has seen the rise of third parties, independent candidates, and of course the occasional crossing of the floor. And during our next election, it's quite possible that a third party would have worked its way into the lower house. Tonight, we invite to the table members of the Democratic National Alliance, Coalition of Independents, and the Bahamas Constitution Party, as we take a deep dive into the state of affairs, a third party's perspective. Stay put. Our conversation begins on the other side of this break. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Tonight, we are discussing the state of affairs, a third party's perspective. Well, tonight it's Ladies' Night on the Record, and leading the charge is the first female leader of the Democratic National Alliance. On May 12, 2011, the DNA officially launched as a political party in the Bahamas under the direction of its first leader, Branville McCartney. Since its inception, the DNA has contested two general elections, the first in 2012 and the last in 2017. And in 2022, they'll be at it again, hoping to be successful as the next government of the Bahamas. After 8 years, the party voted in Mrs. Arinthia Kumalafe, who succeeded interim leader Christopher Mortimer, becoming the party's first female leader. Help me welcome back to On the Record, DNA leader, Mrs. Arinthia Kumalafe. Welcome back to On the Record. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you? It's always good to be here. Thank you.
Always good to have you. I know the moment you're on this show, I'm assured of a good show. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about our subject tonight, the state of affairs of our country. If you could, your overview of where we are at this juncture, now 4 years under the Free National Movement.
Well, certainly I think nobody would question the fact that there is a general belief and consensus that we are not headed in the right direction as a country, even if you look at things from a macroeconomic level or from a microeconomic level. If you ask persons today if their lives are better today compared to May 10, 2017, they will tell you no. Things are not better today, except for perhaps maybe if you are an F&M crony or somebody who has been the beneficiary of nepotism. We must remind the public that when the Free National Movement came to office, that they were not voted in because persons had a significant amount of confidence in their policies or their leadership. It was largely due to the fact that there was a strong apathy towards the PLP. A lot of persons did not want the PLP to be re-elected. And so that was reflected very largely in the 35-4 majority that the F&M got in favor in the House of Assembly. And of course, with such a large majority, it weakened the voice of the opposition on the inside of Parliament compared to on the outside. where we believe that the opposition has been much stronger, certainly from the DNA, who has been holding their feet to the fire, as well as from the general public.
So, do you believe then that, well, in the last election, it would have seemed that, as you said, that people were angry with the PLP, they wanted them out. Do you see something similar, or do you see us headed towards that direction now with this particular government? And where does that leave the DNA?
Absolutely. In fact, the apathy is stronger toward this minister-led administration that I've seen in any administration in Bahamian history. And the apathy had set in so quickly. It set in from as early as the 2017. You would recall that when the administration came in, they went on a 10-week vacation. And when they came back, they had a budget that was just loaded. Before they left, they had a budget that was loaded with incentives for the rich, that tax incentives for the rich, as well as when they got back from that vacation, they focused heavily on a commercial enterprise bill, a bill that the opposition, the real opposition at that time, the Bahamian people and the DNA, led largely by the DNA, speaking to the fact that this commercial enterprise bill was largely in favor of foreign direct investors compared to Bahamian investors. And you would recall that we had to call for some amendments we had to call for some amendments to that particular bill to make provisions for Bahamians. Also, when you consider the fact that this administration campaigned largely on tenets of transparency and accountability, and they've been anything but that. The Prime Minister had a press secretary, and the purpose of that press secretary was to be able to update the public on certain issues that were going on in the government, the policy items, keeping the Bahamian people abreast. And if you ask where the press secretary is today, of course, the question will be nobody knows. And oftentimes when the press secretary would come to brief the Bahamian people, he did not have all the information that he needed to be able to answer the questions from the media. This administration, led by Dr. Minnis as well, during his opposition period, also criticized the then administration led by Mr. Christie when they implemented the value-added tax, coming in at a rate of 7.5%. And the Prime Minister is on record as saying that this increase in tax and this introduction of this new tax was a lazy effort by the then PLP administration, only to find that just 1 year in from this government, from this minister-led administration's point or time in government, they went forward and they increased back by 60% up to 12%. And so you saw a lot of inconsistencies that was taking place with the administration. You know, unfortunately, Dominica had the challenge there with a catastrophic storm, and we saw how the Prime Minister went, and he immediately went to give aid and relief, and even stood up in the House of Parliament and shed tears for Dominica. But when we had the challenges with Ragged Island, he was slow to respond, and to this day, Ragged Island has still not yet been restored an entire 4 years later. So, of course, the Bahamian people saw very quickly the inconsistencies with this administration, the fact that this administration did not come to office to look out for the interests of the Bahamian people, not as a priority, or more specifically, let me be clear, not the majority of the Bahamians, but rather special interest groups took priority. And so, of course, the challenges that you saw the PLP face some 3-4 years into their administration, and the Bahamian people rewarded them by voting them out of office in 2017, this administration is clearly on that same path.
So one of the, or some of the things that the FNM has sought to explain would be the delay in some of their promises due to some of the catastrophic events that have occurred within their administration. Hurricane Irma being one of them, but certainly right behind that came Dorian. No need to explain what that was about. And then, of course, this global crisis with COVID-19. Do you think that they are using these as an excuse, or were these legitimate issues that prevented this government from fulfilling the many promises that they had laid out to the Bahamian people?
Of course, there's no doubt that this administration has faced a lot of external shocks and catastrophic events that has had an impact on the country and obviously had an impact on their delivery of goods and services from the government perspective insofar as finances are concerned. But obviously these things are also being used as excuses by the current administration. The Minnis administration was elected to office May 10, 2017. They had from May 10, 2017 to May 10, 2018 to May 10, 2019, a lot could have been done in that period. When we talk about Dorian and we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are still in the throes of, we must not lose sight of the fact that Dorian hit the Bahamas in the second quarter of their second fiscal year. And so this was in September 2019, and then the COVID pandemic started to have a major impact from a negative standpoint on the Bahamian economy in the third quarter or the final quarter of that same fiscal year that Dorian hit. So it would have only been that 1 year where they would have been impacted, the March 2020 and then the September 2019. They had 2 full years to be able to affect a lot of the plans that they spoke to. So if you say, for example, you campaigned on transparency and accountability, you had 2 full years to put legislation on the table for campaign finance reform. You had 2 full years to get freedom of information up to the level where it needed to be. You had 2 full years to put whistleblower legislation in place to stem the corruption. If you said that the PLP administration was so corrupt and the perception to the world was that the Bahamas was corrupt, and you went to the world reiterating this fact, and so if you were so concerned about the corruption in the country and you wanted to implement an anti-corruption agenda, then that would have been top priority in your parliamentary sessions and your parliamentary agenda.
I've got a very valid point you're laying out here, but I've got to ask you, given the opportunity and all that has happened, what would you and the DNA have done differently or better?
Well, certainly we have said that good governance, our good governance platform, was going to be a priority for us because we were and continue to campaign on an anti-corruption agenda and a good governance agenda. So campaign finance reform would have been top of the list, freedom of information, whistleblower legislation, integrity commission, and all of those bills that would have put the checks and balances on our administration to ensure that corruption was either reduced or eliminated. Secondly, from an economic standpoint, we would not have implemented value-added, we would not have increased value-added tax in the manner at all that the Free National Movement did. We lobbied strongly against this. In fact, we marched against this. We marched in the Keep Your Corn Beef march. We also marched against the increase of BPL and the high electricity bill because we said that the Bahamian masses could not take it. Bahamian businesses could not take it. The cost of living was already high. We knew that Bahama was coming on stream, and we needed Bahama to have an opportunity to set itself so that it can have the impact on our gross domestic product that we were anticipating by the added rooms, the thousands of rooms that Bahama was bringing, and the thousands of jobs that it was creating. Now, what this administration did, they said that there was $400 million of outstanding bills and obligations that had not been paid by previous prime ministers, Prime Minister Ingram and Prime Minister Christie. And so what they did, in terms of speaking from fiscal or promoting it as fiscal prudence and getting our house in order, they put us on an aggressive five-year track to reduce the deficit down to very low levels and to have the Bahamian people pay for that. They increased back to 12%. So $400 million to be able to pay off these outstanding obligations over a 5-year period. We said that that was too short of a period of time. It was going to put the pressure on the masses. It was going to put the pressure on businesses. And unfortunately, we were proven right. There was a fall off in jobs. Employers had to lay off because of the high cost. I mean, the cost of living went up overnight. Food went up overnight. Gas prices went up overnight. Services that you have to access every day went up overnight. We lobbied for a removal of VAT of medical services and VAT of healthcare so that we can bring down the cost of living for Bahamians in that aspect. If you are talking, and the Minister of Health in this administration or in earlier days was talking about the fact that we have one of the sickest nations. We have all of these non-communicable diseases, and we have all of these challenges with health among the Bahamian population. Yet, There was no adjustment to breadbasket items to put more healthy items inside the breadbasket items list. There was no removal of value-added tax from healthcare and insurances to make the cost of accessing the services for a healthy society lower. So these are things that we would not have done. The other thing we would have done, other than not increasing the value-added tax, was we would have implemented our plan to move toward true diversification of the Bahamian economy. And what we are campaigning on and have been campaigning on now, which is agricultural development, so that we can move toward food security and cut into that $1 billion import bill. And in our strategy, even now, we have a plan to reduce the food import bill to $500 million within over a 10-year period. We would have also moved to investing into clean and alternative energy. We have always been the Green Party, always campaigning on a diverse energy platform in solarization, liquefied natural gas, and exploring also hydro and wind opportunities.
Mrs. Kumalafe, you've laid out certainly a laundry list of what you would have done differently. We've got to take a break, though. We'll pick up on the other side. Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to dissect the DNA's 4-year report card on the FNM's time in government. Also, I want to ask you about the budget just tabled in the House of Assembly this week. And later on in the show, we're going to switch gears to some other upcoming parties. There's more on the record right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. Tonight we discuss the state of affairs, third party's perspective. On May 10th of this year, on the FNM's 4th anniversary in office, the Democratic National Alliance issued a report card via a press statement. In that report, the DNA issued the FNM an F in prioritization, transparency, stable governance, economic development, public health care, financial services, sound judgment, communication skills, empathy and compassion, public sector, meritocracy, anti-cronyism and nepotism, as well as anti-corruption, pension reform, energy reform and tax reform, an F across the board. What a report card. My guest tonight is the head mistress of the school that issued that report card. She's DNA leader, Mrs. Arinthia Kumalafe. Quite a scathing report of all of these things. You went into a lot of detail. But before we get to that, I want to go to this week's tabling of the FNM's budget. Some of your key takeaways from the Prime Minister's presentation in the House of Assembly relative to the budget.
Well, that budget was clearly an election budget. There were some things in there that were good and worthy of note, but they were too little too late. The Prime Minister took 4 years to put in place these measures that can have a significant impact on the development of Bahamians' lives. 4 years too late, not taking care of the Bahamian people and not placing them as a priority. But one of the things we found with the budget was that the budget was not very articulate in terms of putting forward a plan. It was difficult and hard-pressed to find what the strategy was, other than being able to deliver some goods ahead of a general election. There was no clear strategy as to what impact we wanted to have on certain industries, how those industries were going to have a positive impact on gross domestic product, what industries were going to create a defined amount of jobs to be able to address the macroeconomic issues that we are facing on the ground right now, which is a high level of unemployment, underemployment, and persons who are facing eviction from their homes, either from back paid rent or back paid mortgage. So there's a lot of things in there when we look at the fact that there were a lot of goods and gifts and goodies given out to entice persons to vote for the Free National Movement in the next general elections. There was nothing that showed a clear medium to long-term plan that would get the Bahamas back on the path to prosperity and economic growth and development.
How effective do you believe the PLP has been as the official opposition?
Well, the opposition has been watered down significantly by the fact that I mentioned earlier there were only 4 members. We do not believe, though, with those 4 members that the PLP opposition has been as agile as it needed to be and being able to address a lot of the issues that were impacting the Bahamian people. In a lot of instances, though, the PLP lacked the moral authority to be able to counter or to challenge the administration because they themselves have had a combined 35 years to govern, and certain of the things that the FNM is failing to deliver on or things that the FNM refuses to even address has not been addressed by the Progressive Liberal Party as well. And so that is why you saw the uprising by the people during these last 4 years. There's been a lot of unrest, a lot of labor unrest. There have been a lot of protests and demonstrations that have been planned, whether it was by us in the DNA or other activist groups that have risen up. It has been the voices of the opposition on the outside of Parliament that has been pushing the metal and holding the government's feet to the fire and holding them to their own pledge of transparency and accountability.
In your report on the stable governance, you noted that the resignation of 4 high-ranking cabinet ministers, as a result, you issued the party an F in this regard. But what kind of action, or what does this show to the international community, and what are the possible repercussions of something like this when the rest of the world is looking in to see so many resignations within one term?
Well, the Bahamas has presented itself as the Bahamas is a brand. It is an international brand, a multi-billion-dollar country that has, and with its number 2 industry being financial services, has marketed itself as a stable international financial center. And the bedrock of that has been our democracy and the fact that we have free and fair elections and the fact that we have stable governance. When you start to have these rumblings at very high levels in our governance, and more specifically at the executive level, then you're going to have persons that are going to be, their confidence, the investor confidence is going to be shaken by this. And diplomatic ties are going to be wondering, persons, when we consider our diplomatic ties and the relationships that we have with allies across the world, they're going to be looking at this and wondering what's going on in the Bahamas. If we look at the executive, the fact that we had 4 high-ranking cabinet ministers that resigned, Brent Simonet, which we are proud of the fact that we largely pushed toward his resignation because we held a protest against corruption and cronyism and nepotism, and we were strongly opposed to the post office deal and the way that it went down, and Brent Simonet himself revealed that out to the general public. Dwayne Sands, who, when the country was under emergency orders, breached those emergency orders as a senior member of the cabinet, as well as the challenges that he faced with the condemnation from his sitting magistrate, Peter Turnquest, who was caught up in a matter that had something to do with his private affairs before he entered politics, but put a large question surrounding the fact that he was the person managing the public finances of the country. And there were serious allegations levied against him in documents that were filed in the court. And Lanisha Roll, who would have exited office as the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture. And there are still questions that are waiting to be answered in that regard. So these are the types of things when you're thinking about the fact that this administration campaigned on transparency and accountability, and you see these high-ranking cabinet ministers demitting office, these things are going to give you a reason for pause.
I do want to challenge that a bit. I'm not in defense, but one of the criticisms of the former administration was that you had all of these cabinet ministers who had these clouds hanging over them, and seemingly nothing was done. There was no public rebuke. They didn't resign. They went into the election, and people saw that as, I guess, an endorsement or support. But you have an instance now where these members of the cabinet are resigning based upon questions that are being raised about activities or whatever they may be. When you look at that now, how do you balance the two? And I guess, okay, so people voted out the PLP because they did nothing, but now you would have four ministers who would have found themselves in an awkward position who have resigned, which is really how it should work.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But the point is there were certain things there that could have been avoided. They were forced to resign because they were found it out. It wasn't like they were so honorable. These things were exposed. In the case of the matter with the health minister, remember there was a member from the general public that recorded a video and leaked it across social media. In the case of Brent Simonetti himself was on a talk show and revealed it, and the post office deal was something that, of course, you could not have allowed that to sit like that because, again, there was loud opposition from the general public, right? So these things were things that could have been avoidable. In the case of the Minister of Finance, our intelligence tells us that this information was known to the Prime Minister even before. And if you consider the fact that the lawyer that actually filed the charges against the Minister of Finance is actually a high-ranking member of the Minister administration having control of the special purpose vehicle that bought the Grand Lucayan Hotel in Grand Bahama. Of course, these things were known to the administration, but it wasn't
to your point.
yeah.
I just want us to, we've got to move forward to some other things. I want to talk about the COVID-19 experience. Do you believe the restrictions put in place were too tight that would have led to some of the economic fallout that we are experiencing? And even on to that, are we playing politics? And I'm talking about across the board. Are we playing politics with this pandemic?
Well, we believe that the management of the COVID-19 pandemic by the administration had exacerbated the economic conditions on the ground. It were these decisions that were not always made according to scientific data. Some of them were last minute. And you would recall there was an incident when the Prime Minister just made a last minute decision to giving persons an opportunity to be able to go and purchase the goods that they needed to have food and everything else that they would need on the inside of their homes in the case of a lockdown. So the decisions that were made, the haphazard decisions, the fact that some decisions were made in favor of certain classes of people versus another class of people, the management of the whole COVID-19 pandemic contributed and exacerbated the situation on the ground that impacted livelihoods. When the government made some of these decisions, ad hoc decisions, last minute decisions, it impacted a lot of from the tourism perspective, it impacted a lot of the arrivals and the bookings that tourists had made. Tourists had made bookings to come to the Bahamas, and some of the resorts here were making way and making provision to be able to accommodate those individuals. And then a pronouncement from the Prime Minister would just set all of that back. And then you would see large cancellations. So it was this uncertainty of what exactly was the plan and the strategy for the way forward that exacerbated things.
We've got a final question here. The DNA has criticized the vaccination incentives on April 21st, stating that the incentives marginalize the majority who do not wish to take the vaccine. What are your thoughts on this, considering when we have heard over and over and over that the vaccinations really are our way out or the way forward? What's your position on this? And are we sending mixed messages to our people?
Yeah, so the administration has said that vaccinations will not be mandatory, but yet you are handing out incentives for persons that if they take the vaccination, they can eat inside restaurants, they can go to Junkanoo, they can travel into Ireland without all of these different protocols that everyone else would be subjected to. But at the same time, you're saying that vaccinations are not mandatory. Our position has always been that vaccinations and the willingness to take them should be a personal decision.
But if I could just for a moment, but these aren't things that are unique to the Bahamas. Elsewhere in the world, people who are vaccinated are being allowed to do certain things, to congregate, to go without masks, indoor dining, things of that nature. So this isn't unique to us. I just wanted to put that caveat in there.
Yeah, well, we understand that, but just because the others are doing it doesn't make it right. The fact that you take the vaccination is not going to eliminate the fact that you can contract the virus. So a lot of these provisions, we've been moving the goalposts with this virus all along the way. At one point, they were telling us internationally not to wear a mask. And then they came back and they said, wear masks. Then they said, wear double masks. And then they said, well, there's no need for double masks. So the goalpost with this virus has been shifting constantly from the time that it hit the global community. But the fact of the matter is, We have always agitated that there should be education on this vaccines. People are genuinely concerned about the efficacy of the vaccine, especially the AstraZeneca, when they see the fact, since we want to quote what's going on internationally, well, internationally, other countries had shelved AstraZeneca to do further testing after they found that some persons were found with blood clots. So we have said that there should be education. We are a nation that is always prone to immunization and vaccination. So we're not opposed to it. We're not anti-vaxxers. But the fact of the matter is, because this is such a peculiar situation, these vaccinations are still experimental, but they have been approved for emergency use. And so persons have their concerns about that, and rightly so. So all we've been asking for is for increased education on the efficacy of these vaccines and whether they would have a negative impact on persons that take them. And of course, there should be no forcing of persons, whether from the employers or from government, to force people to take vaccines, because it is a personal choice. That's been our main point.
Thank you very much. We are out of time. We've got to get some more guests in. I wish we could have talked so much longer, because you always bring so much great information to the show, and you're always challenging and engaging. Thank you so very much. Wish you all the best. I know that you guys are out there campaigning and moving along and getting ready many more times to come. So we'll talk to you again sometime soon, I'm sure, in the future.
Thank you. It's always good to be here. I appreciate it.
Thanks again. When we return, we continue Ladies' Night with two of the strong women of the Coalition of Independence. You won't want to miss it, and you don't want to miss what they have to say. On the Record is back right after this. Arantia, every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page. We're back on the record. Our discussion tonight is the state of affairs, a third party's perspective. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. As always, thank you so much for staying with us. One of the newest parties on the block is the Coalition of Independence, and they are undoubtedly one that the Bahamian people have been actively listening to. Led by longtime political activist Lincoln Bain, the party brings together a vast group of independent candidates who pride themselves on being the everyday Bahamians that make up this great country. One of my guests for this next segment is Aisha Lady Triumph Clare. She has served as an educator for over 16 years and is vying to be the next Member of Parliament for Marathon. She's joined by Faith Presenti, a pastor and trained social services officer, having worked with the Ministry of Social Services and the National Parenting Program. Please help me welcome them both to this first-time appearance on the record. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, so let's dive right in. Voters would have experienced the FNM and the PLP, and to some degree the DNA. Tell us about the Coalition of Independence and what you bring to the table that you think is different. Go, either one of you.
Okay, well, I could just jump right in. The Coalition of Independence, of course, is a third party, and it's a newly formed party. We are a group of independent candidates that have came together to form a coalition. And what we bring to the table is or at least we revisit the natural resources. We believe that our Bahamian citizens should be owners in our own country. And we vow to make that take place. We want our citizens to be owners. And so Coalition of Independence, newly formed, but a group of strong men and women that are willing to take the Bahamas to the next level.
Aisha, on March 18th at your launch, you mentioned, or the party would have mentioned, that previous governments, within previous government, minority groups, let's say like Rastafarians, have not had a seat at the table. What do you foresee the impact being of having minority groups in the decision-making process in our country?
Thank you for that question. I think it's very important that everybody be represented at the table. I think for successive governments, successive years, that not the average person was not at the table. The average person would have not been there. I think right now, and I believe that the coalition is in place to bring together and to allow everyone to have a seat, everyone to be seated, and everyone to be seen at the table for, it's the time for the people. And, we've used that candidly with the past government. It was the people's time. I believe now it is the people's time. It's the true people's time. Every one of us, from the baby at the breast to the elderly person, it is our time to be seen, it's our time to be heard, and it's our time to be seated at this table.
Faith, historically, we have always had third parties on the fringes. I mean, if we know anything about political history, we know that in 1967 it was those third parties and independents that helped to usher in majority rule. But since then, third parties have really not been able to have a very strong foothold in governance in Parliament. What do you think is different this time, or what do you think will give you all a shot this time at getting in Parliament, because that's where you've got to really get into to make real change? But what do you think is different this time around that you think will endear voters to you, to see you have a presence within Parliament?
Well, Jerome, I think that over the years we've seen the back and forth of the PLP and the FNM. We've seen that they've had the opportunity to show the Bahamian people or to take us to the next level. And I think it's in my opinion, and many persons, that they have not done that over the years. I think at this particular time now, it's vying for a change. It's vying for something new. The fact is they have already experienced the PLP and they've already experienced the FNM. And both of them, in my opinion, have not made pledge to the Bahamian people and ensure that they reach the state that they need to be. I think this is the time now when a third party is going to be able to be recognized simply because the people are tired and they're looking for change.
Of course, as we've said, it's Ladies' Night on the record tonight. What your views, Aisha, on the almost non-existent representation of women at the cabinet level and even at the party level? You look at both major parties and there is literally little to no women representation. Very small, and certainly not in the forefront. Outside of the DNA, I would have just had the DNA leader on. But you're on the two major parties that are for the most part have held the seat of government. But you look now in today, 2021, women are almost non-existent.
I think it's a sad indictment in our country. I believe that women have been that person to keep the family together, to make sure things are done. If you want it said, it's said, give it to a man. Margaret Thatcher. If you want it done, she said, give it to a woman. Women are people that get the job done. We are people that hold the family together. We are people that we do it. We make it work. We make sure that the children are fed. We make sure that they're to school. We make sure that everything happens on the highest scale, on the highest level. And I feel that we as a country need to now see women as who we are. We've given it to the males for many, many years now.
So I want to challenge you, though, because you say, we've got to give it to the women. But what do you think, or what needs to be done to instill that confidence? I think a lot of men and even women are not confident in the leadership ability of women. I'm going to challenge you with that question. What's different? What are you doing in order to inspire that confidence?
I believe that even the menopausal woman has a contribution to our country. I believe that even the emotional woman has a contribution to our country. I believe that we put women in a capsule and in a box and in a tube, and we say, oh, you only can go this far. If you remember, they said that women were supposed to be barefoot and pregnant, and you just keep having children. But women have evolved over the years. We have evolved into the beings that we are, and we get it done, Jerome. We get it done. We get the job done. Hard, small, big, whatever it is, we get it done. So I'm saying to the parties out there, please open your doors. I mean, come on. Let's push the women in. And I think women are afraid because there is so much that comes along with it as a woman. You know, it's almost like you're fighting a battle inwardly and you're fighting a battle outwardly. You know, you have to fight against so much as a woman. It's so sad. And I believe that women have to stand up. We have to come together. We have to come together and we have to stand together and we have to support each other, because sometimes women are our worst, you know, our worst.
Bobby, you said that. I say it sometimes on the show and I get licked for it, but it's true. And along the lines, we've got to move forward. But very quickly, Faith, you know, you say that women have got to come together to support other women. But when you look at there are so many things that are outstanding in terms of legislation. You look at things like the marital rape law. You look at all of these things that, you know, are still disadvantaging and disenfranchising women. Given the opportunity, what would be some of the key things that you and other members of your party, given the opportunity, what are some of the things that you would change for the state of women in this country today?
I think one of the things that we are definitely pushing is for women to be on the same level or recognized on the same level as men. If I can add to my colleague Aisha, I would like to say that the fact of the matter is women have always been in the political arena. Women have always been the backbone. Women have always been the footman, if I can say it in that term. The fact is at this point, we're just seeing more women being the face of coming forward in leadership. It's more women face coming forward in leadership, but she's always been there. She probably has been the one to write many of the scripts that you would have heard a man read out to a congregation or even in Parliament. And so the fact is, she has always been there. I think what we are looking at now, we're seeing more women that are coming forth, and their face is now on the banner. And so I think equality definitely is what we are vying for in our party and for the women.
As this show is about a state of the affairs, we've got to get back on track, but I needed to get that in. But, you know, if you can begin now to really put into context for us this government's performance after 4 years, Aisha, I'm going to begin with you. Where would you point out some of the greatest, as you see them, failures or missteps that this government has taken in the past 4 years?
I think there were a lot of missteps, and I think what was very important is to show the compassion to the people. If we want to start with Dorian was a huge misstep, in my opinion. I believe that we failed the people. The government failed the people. And I'm not saying that you had to, you know, take people by the hand, take them out of the homes, but I'm saying compassion was very important. And even after having those bodies placed in that container for so many years, I mean, how could you in your right mind find logic in that, find the logic in what was done to the people? Also, when we talk about the pandemic, when we think about the pandemic, we see that, you know, what was it for, you know, the lockdowns were necessary because we didn't know what was going on in our country. We didn't know what to expect from this pandemic, but was it fair? You had people being arrested for certain things not being arrested. You had people being able to fly in. You had people who were not able to fly in. So I believe that the government has not been fair across the board. I believe that the government has made a lot of missteps as it pertains to the people, and the compassion that should have been shown was not shown. And like you said, Jerome, it's the women that show compassion. I'm so sorry, I had to throw that in there. It's the women that show empathy towards what's going on. And we have to be able to show that compassion to the people, because It's not what you say, Jerome. It's how you say it and how you present it.
You're channeling my late mother in many ways as you say that. She would tell me that all the time. Faith Percenti, you have extensive experience within social services and servicing the needs of Bahamian people. When you look at this government's track record on governance during this pandemic, from rent assistance to unemployment and food assistance, was it enough? And what would you have done differently given the opportunity?
Well, Jerome, first of all, no, I don't think it was enough. Um, I do think that the government could have pushed more into the food assistance program, the rental assistance program. This pandemic, of course, being a global pandemic, really brought our country to its knees. And I feel that the government should have taken it hands on, not only from a health perspective, as we would have heard our prime minister stated that his interest was in saving lives, but really in him looking at the physical structure of saving, he forgot about the other parts. And so really he destroyed lives in the interim of it. There were a lot of funds that were borrowed for so many different areas, one being $20 million for sidewalks that could have gone into rental assistance programs. So many persons got put out of where they were living. A lot of persons lost their homes. So many persons couldn't find food, and that funds could have been gone into the Bahamian people. And the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, what I would have done differently, I would have looked at the holistic nature of the Bahamian people in this pandemic. I would not have only looked at it from a health standard, even though we know that our prime minister is a doctor, but he must have taken the opportunity to look at it as from how it would have affected persons economically. And so in that regard, I really would have looked towards how persons would have been affected through their homes, family, because really family is the key, and that's what he did not focus on. And what I would have focused on was family in this time.
We've got 1 minute to go, Aisha. I'm going to end off with you. Is there any real difference or fundamental difference between the FNM and the PLB, in your opinion?
In my opinion, they come together and they make this orange color. They make this orange color. I don't see a difference. I think they all just blend together, and it's almost like pass the baton, is your time. Pass the baton, is your time. I don't see a difference in it at all, the PLP or the FNM. I believe they spit out the same ideals, the same logic, the same ideologies. In my opinion, there is no difference. So they're just the orange team for me right now.
The orange team, I've never heard it put that way. Ladies, unfortunately, we're out of time, but, we're coming up onto the election season. Some say elections are right around the corner, but we will have more opportunities to talk. So I'm going to sit here and say we're going to have you back. I give you that promise. We'll talk a little bit more, but thank you. This is your first appearance on the record, and I think the first time someone from your coalition has been on, so you've made history in many ways. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And best of luck to you going forward. When On the Record returns, we will wrap up Ladies' Night with the first female leader of a political party in the Bahamas. She's Ali McIntosh. There's more on the record right after this. Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook. Back to On the Record. This is our final segment, and thank you for staying with us as we discuss the state of affairs, a third party's perspective. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. In 1999, the Bahamas saw the birthing of another new political party at the time by way of different This time, it was being led by a woman. The Bahamas Constitution Party, led by S. Ali McIntosh, based their mandate on returning to good governance, according to the preamble of the Constitution. McIntosh is a journalist and radio personality by profession who spent much of her formative years at the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. She is president and CEO of S. Ali McIntosh and Associates Leadership Consultants. Please help me welcome to On the Record for the first time, leader of the Bahamas Constitution Party, Ali McIntosh. Ali, welcome to the show. We go way back. We are ZNS colleagues. I've known her for many years, so excuse me if we're going to take some liberties here. Let's start out by talking, first of all, getting you to weigh in on the state of affairs in our country. If you could sort of give us your view on where we are as a country right now, 4 years into this FNM administration.
Wow, Jerome, it's good to see you. As you say, catching up, it's wonderful. You know, you're a powerful journalist all along. You've done good. And I want to congratulate you on the show.
Thank you.
In regards to what's happening in the country, of course, as you indicated, over the last 22, 23 years, we have been looking at the state of affairs. And as a journalist, when you stop the job as a journalist, you don't really stop doing the things that is important. And so I've always looked at the country and looked at the issues that are happening. And of course, the last 4 years of the Minister administration has been phenomenal. And when I say that, I am talking about based on all of the things that's happened over the last 20 years or so. And this government really causes me to wonder how far can we go in terms of further down the ladder of good governance. When we started the BCP 20 years ago, it appears 23 years now, nothing has really changed. The government of the day continues to borrow money, continues to pretend that the issues that relates to governance doesn't matter whenever there's a hurricane or some natural disaster. The fact is that you are not exempt. No government is exempt to say that they can't accomplish something because of the hurricane. We live in a hurricane belt. So when you make that excuse, according to the Prime Minister, his accomplishment, I would put at almost, I would say D-. And the reason is because you are hired, you are elected to govern the people with all of these circumstances. And so we're in a bad place at this point. And I do believe that this government has not done the kind of job that it should have done and it could have done, given whatever circumstances are put before them.
Ali, I've got to ask you, by your own admission, 20 years you've been in this political game, so to speak, and vying for office, having never been successful at the polls. What keeps you coming back at this year after year, election after election? And what makes you think it's going to be different this time around? What do you think may endear the Bahamian people to you this time around?
Well, let's first talk about why I keep coming back. The fact of the Constitution, or the preamble of the Constitution, as you indicated in your introduction, is the reason the Bahamas Constitution came forward. The fact of the preamble of the Constitution indicate core values in which we should govern, mainly the respect for the rule of law, Christian values, but respect for the rule of law and governing so that every person in the community, every Bahamian has equal opportunity. That has not happened. Successive governments has failed that. And this is the first time in a long time have I seen that the constitutional rights of so many Bahamians are compromised by the work of the government of the Bahamas. Now, we know that, as you say, in regards to what keeps me coming back, I see that the same things are still happening. And that's why I continue to move forward in this regard. And number two, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is ready for change. They have gone from the PLP to the FNM, to the PLP, back to the FNM, and now they're the FNM for the third time. And they're realizing nothing has really changed. All of the governments promise, but they do not do what they say. And that is the reason I believe that the Bahamian people is ready for absolute change based on what it is we're supposed to be doing regarding the governance of the nation.
How would you sort of categorize some of the key issues that are affecting this country, issues that you think will be in the minds of voters when they go to the polls this time around?
I think one of the key issues is the economy. And the economy in several ways. The economy as to how people have opportunity to live. Of course, after the pandemic and even coming out of Dorian, of course, the unemployment rate is very high. At this point, I think they said more than 60% of the people were not back to work, or 40%, I'm sorry, were not back to work. But the fact that the tourism industry is down, it means the people are not having the opportunity they need. And the fact that the government is still looking towards tourism to get us out of the mess, I think that we need to actually look to other issues or other ways in which we can generate revenue for this economy. So what has to happen is the diversification of the economy, Jerome, the diversification of the economy according to the Bahamas Constitution Party. And you can go on our website, bcpparty.org. We have released our platform, and it will show you the many ways of creative, innovative ways that we can diversify this economy away from tourism and show the people of Bahamas that a government must be responsible for generating opportunities for people and generating opportunities for income for the country. Because right now, only thing is happening is borrowing, and we look at the newspaper today, more borrowing. It is a philosophy that I put on successive governments of borrow, tax, and spend. It's asinine, and it continues to make a not a good impression on the people of the Bahamas. They do believe their government should do better in regards to how opportunities are available for them.
If I might, earlier on, you mentioned that in your view, the constitutional rights of Bahamians have been compromised in ways previously unseen. Do you attribute that to the emergency powers? And if so, what would you have done differently to put some measures in place to try and keep the Bahamian people safe during this pandemic?
I do believe it is necessary to, when the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020, when we had to put down unprecedented emergency power act. We cannot even remember in our lifetime that having to happen. But we did indicate when the government attempted with the emergency powers to go on extended periods of emergency powers. We believe that the emergency powers, once it was enacted, it should have been for 14 days, and every 14 days, that should have been extended as it's evaluated. The purpose that was said in that regard, even in the Constitution, is so that we try our best not to compromise the values of constitutional and fundamental rights. But the government of the Bahamas has really pushed it. This last emergency order, I believe, should not have been. It appears to be a way of grabbing power. I think as everyone is moving out of the pandemic, there's no reason to have emergency powers that compromises all our rights. We can put in place measures without an Emergency Powers Act. And people know that if you are going to compromise or you're going to you're gonna infringe on the rights of the people, it should be for shorter times, it should be for shorter measures, and it should be as little as possible and as less as you can do. This is important, and I do believe this government is taking too much latitude with the Emergency Powers Act.
Ali McIntosh, we are unfortunately out of time. I know we have lots more to talk about, but as I've said to my guests, as we enter the political season, we certainly will make more of these opportunities available. But thank you so much. I always enjoy the constitutional discussions, and I have to be honest with you, I don't think that we have enough of those discussions in this country. I don't think that we understand our rights. We certainly don't always understand and appreciate what the Constitution does and how sacred of a document that is. So I thank you very much for coming on. All the best to you. Again, you've been at it for so long, and I admire you for that. Others would have given up a long time ago. So thank you, and all the best to you. And I'm sure we'll talk again sometime soon.
Yes, thank you very much, Jerome, for the opportunity. But because the constitutional rights are being infringed at this time, the need for the Bahamas Constitution Party, it continues to be valid.
Thank you very much. We certainly will have more discussions in the future. That's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record. Special thanks to all of my guests, all of the ladies from the DNA, the IOC, and the BCP for joining me. And of course, to you, our audience, we couldn't do it without you. We'll see you next time, same place, same time, right here on The Record. Good night, everyone.